225 came here. After 2 days of fighting, only 90 could still bear arms. Behind me is a memorial that symbolizes the Ranger daggers that were thrust into the top of these cliffs. And before me are the men who put them there. These are the boys of Puente Hope. These are the men who took the cliffs. These are the champions who helped free a continent. And these are the heroes who helped end a war.
That was former President Ronald Reagan delivering his iconic D-Day speech back in 1984 about the brave young men who climbed the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc using ropes, hooks, and ladders to reach a suspected German gun emplacement 100 feet up. And that is where we begin this morning. In Normandy, France, for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings, the invasion that propelled the end to World War II. Right now, President Biden is meeting with global leaders and the veterans who sacrificed their lives. And good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Thursday, June 6th. Along with Willie and me, we have the host of Way Too Early, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire, MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations and former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, retired four-star Navy Admiral James Stavridis. He's Chief International Analyst for NBC News. Also with us, author and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. And Willie, if it's possible, this D-Day 80 years later, always so poignant, but also so current to our own challenges today in Ukraine, in Israel, and even in America's own elections.
It is, and we'll hear some of those themes from President Biden in a speech he'll make there at Normandy a short time from now. We, of course, will carry that live. And you're so moved by seeing the faces of now 80 years. If you think about these young men, and they were mostly men, 17, 18 years old on D-Day, and now in their late 90s. It's incredibly moving to see them return to this sacred place. And we have a great group assembled to talk about the meaning of this day, as you say, 80 years ago, but also today. We'll do that in just a moment, but let's begin in Paris, where we find NBC News senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell traveling with the president. So, Kelly, what themes do we expect to hear from President Biden in just a bit here?
Well, certainly we will hear about how the history you were just talking about folds over into a relevant new way for the times that we live in now, and that history teaches lessons about what was at stake then and what could arguably be at stake now, especially here in Europe, where there is a war in Ukraine. Obviously, there is a war in Gaza and Israel. And the president will talk about how the young men who have come back here as senior citizens, many of them in wheelchairs, but back. 200 American servicemen who were here at D-Day are back for this celebration, and they represent the thousands who fought during that operation and many who sacrificed their lives. And the white crosses that cover the grasses of Normandy represent young men who were 17, 18, 20 years old. No old men are buried at that cemetery. And the sacrifice they made is relevant in today's world for countries that believe democracy is worth fighting for, worth preserving, and that, in fact, it must be preserved because there are forces in the world that test it. So expect those kinds of themes from the president. We have watched this morning as he's been meeting with some of the veterans who have come back. Personal conversations, taking photos with them, sharing stories. In one instance, we saw them singing happy birthday to one of the veterans who is celebrating what must be quite a notable birthday when you consider how time has passed. And 80 years is, of course, so significant because it connects to those past moments of Ronald Reagan, of Bill Clinton, of George W. Bush, other American presidents who have come here with other world leaders, sort of fortifying the alliances that created a new world order to protect democracies from the kind of conflict where borders were seized and changed at force. And the world order that was created because of the sacrifice of those veterans, those young men who were fighting for a cause greater than themselves, really saving the world at that time, that created a new way for nations to organize themselves, and that is very relevant today when the president has done so much to try to, from his point of view, work on building the alliances that support Ukraine. It's a harder sell in some ways with Israel, given the nature of the way Gaza has gone, but that these alliances matter and the values underpinning them very much matter and feel relevant today. So that's what we expect from the president as he participates in these ceremonies, where you see the faces of those who were here 80 years ago and the leaders who represent these nations today.
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell in Paris for us this morning, summing it up very well for us. Kelly, thanks so much. We appreciate it. Admiral Stavridis, as a military man yourself, I'm curious, just on a gut level, what you're feeling this morning as you look at the faces of these men who did nothing short of saving the world beginning on D-Day.
Pride in the United States of America, that we produce young men and women who do all of this. On the 50th anniversary of D-Day 25 years ago, I was a young destroyer captain, and I was honored to be ordered to anchor my ship off the beach at Omaha the morning before the ceremony you're about to see. My crew got up at dawn, unrequired. Every crew member, 350 men and women, average age 25 years old, stood, watched the sun come up on that beach, paying homage to the young men of Pointe du Hoc. We were anchored not far from there. So that's first and foremost. And then secondly, to pick up a practical theme of today, which I think you'll hear repeated, recall 15 allies, 15 different allies were participating in that landing. The British, the Canadian, many of the European nations, some of them fighting in exile after their countries had been conquered. So as I looked left and right, I saw ships from a dozen different nations. Alliances matter. They mattered that day. On Hitler's side, there was one nation. It was Germany. He had to stand against an alliance. I think those are the two salient themes for me on this morning: pride in young Americans and the power of alliances.
Michael Beschloss, Admiral Stavridis just said something that all of us can agree with, probably share the same feeling, that when we watch these pictures from Normandy, we feel pride as Americans, pride in the job that was done, pride in what was accomplished. But there's something else, another word that comes to my mind, having been to Normandy many, many times over many celebrations, and it's history. Our history as a nation, and the fact that we have forgotten so much of our history here in the 21st century. We have forgotten that when those landings occurred on the 5 different landing spots on those beaches along the Normandy Strip, and the boys who climbed Pointe du Hoc, Colonel Rudder led them. And Colonel Rudder once told me that the feeling that he had was the men, the Germans up in that pillbox, had to be looking out at the Armada on the Channel and thinking about the men who were about to climb a sheer cliff. And they had to be thinking, the Germans thinking, they're coming up this cliff after us. Wow. That was a point of danger, lethal danger for them. But the men who were there, they joined the Army. They went voluntarily. They came from small towns and big cities across the United States of America. We seem as a nation to have forgotten what it is to be together. We were all together on that day. And I'm wondering what your view is of the history that we shared then and the history that we seem now to forget.
That was Mike Barnacle poetry. I hope I can do as well. Let's look at it through the lens of 2024. What is meaningful to us right now? Number one, we live in a free country that is not dominated by dictatorships because of the huge sacrifices that were made by Americans on that day and the others of the Allied armies who were fighting in World War II. if D-Day had not worked, if that invasion, if that incursion had collapsed, let's say those boats had been driven back into the sea, perhaps because there had been bad weather, which was, as you know, a very great chance that there might have been, that might have broken the morale that ultimately won that war. This was one of the crucial days in American history, number one. Second of all, they were fighting for democracy. Just before World War II, in 1940, Franklin Roosevelt was running against Wendell Willkie. In October of 1940, Wendell Willkie was just about beating Franklin Roosevelt, and that's because he was making the argument FDR is going to drag this country into an unnecessary war after Election Day if he's elected. Someone even said FDR, if reelected, will plow under, if you can believe that a politician said this, every fourth American boy. A Republican leader said that. That's how divided this country was. Yet, in the world of 1941, almost instantly after Pearl Harbor, the country almost completely united behind the goal of defending freedom at its hour of maximum danger. One more point. The ultimate general of the Army, Dwight Eisenhower, wrote out a famous memo that wasn't released until long afterwards, to be released if the invasion failed. And Eisenhower took the blame, which is something that I wish every American leader did in that kind of case. He said, if this invasion should fail, the blame will be mine alone.
Well, to build on the words that come to mind on this day from Mike and Michael Beschloss, pride, history, but part of that history is also a lot of pain, the losses that were endured that day. And I wonder, looking at the faces of these survivors, the weight of those losses that they witnessed firsthand, they must feel pride, but also so many other emotions, living with the memories of those who died on D-Day. And Richard Haass, I wonder if President Biden will draw that line between the pride of our history and the pain endured for freedom to what we confront today, facing an election that could reshape American leadership around the world.
He's sure to do that, Mika. History, as Mark Twain has said mentioned, doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I think what President Biden today will be doing is highlighting the rhymes. Once again, a world challenged by aggression. Once again, questions whether the United States will rise to the occasion. And the obvious place to think about is Ukraine, where for several months the United States failed to rise to the occasion. Isolationism is a virus that never disappears from the body politic. And I would expect the president's going to make a powerful argument that the United States still needs to rise to occasions. We can't pursue the folly of isolationism. We've got to work with others. That's the great comparative advantage of American foreign policy. We have this pool of partners, these allies to work with. And I think he's going to be speaking in many ways to the American people.